10 days before the arrival of the end of the world, my honest and simple father was actually reborn like someone possessed. He dragged my mother and me to start frantically hoarding all kinds of supplies. In these seemingly peaceful days of lying flat, I unexpectedly awakened an extremely strange superpower, which was the ability to hear the inner voices of zombies. At first, I thought this superpower wasn't of much use, but I never expected that something completely unexpected would happen later. That morning, I was still enjoying my vacation and sound asleep with my head buried under the covers when I was awakened by the sound of my father frantically pounding on the bedroom door. 5 minutes later, I sat in the living room with a sleepy look on my face, listening to my father vividly describing the miserable scenes of the end of the world. "Dad, you must have had a nightmare. I often have such dreams. Toots okay," I said, patting his shoulder reassuringly. But when my father saw that I didn't believe him, he turned to look at my mother. Apparently, my mother didn't believe his words either. Then, my father was like a donkey turning a millstone, constantly pacing in circles in the living room. My father is usually an honest and decent person. I guess this nightmare was so vivid that it made him so terrified. "Dad, since you said you're reborn from the end of the world, you must remember the news of these days. Tell us one," I said. I thought that as long as he couldn't tell one, he would realize that he had just had a nightmare. When my father heard this, he suddenly had an expression of being enlightened. Right. Let me think. Today is the TH. And tomorrow is the TH. That celebrity you like will get into trouble on the TH. Dad, you're really trendy. You even know what it means to get into trouble. My heart tightened. Something was wrong. It seemed that the focus was mistaken. The celebrity I like will get into trouble. You kept talking about it for several days, and even posted on your WeChat moments, saying something like, "Heartbroken on the TH." It sounded so real. That night, except for my mother, none of us slept well. My father because of his nightmare about the end of the world, and I because of my father's prophecy. Actually, the reason I became a fan of this celebrity was just that there was a bit of resemblance between him and Shuning Yin in his eyebrows. Early the next morning, I was awakened by the vibration of my mobile phone. I picked up the phone and saw that there were plus messages in the fan group. "It can't be. Don't believe this is true. My brother isn't that kind of person. People aren't sages even if it's tax evasion. The crime doesn't deserve death." My heart trembled violently, and my hands started shaking uncontrollably. It took me several tries to open that yellow icon on the phone interface. On the trending searches, there was a prominent explosive label. In this quiet morning, my heart started pounding like a drum, and cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Mom, Dad, according to my father, there are still days left until the end of the world. In these days, we have to make full preparations first. We need to find a large house in a sparsely populated area. This will make it convenient for us to store supplies, and also for our subsequent life. The house we live in now is only about 100 square meters. Not to mention that we can't store much stuff, but the population density here is also too high." After some discussion, our family of 3 unanimously took a fancy to the villa area in the east of the city. Although the rent is a bit expensive, now that the end of the world is approaching, money will soon become useless. So we split into 2 groups. My mother was in charge of finding a suitable house, and my father and I were responsible for purchasing supplies. We specially rented a large truck used for transporting pigs, went to a certain large market, and started a frantic shopping spree. For foods like luosafen, river snail rice noodles, instant noodles, dried noodles, and self-heating hot pots that can be stored for a long time, and are not afraid of expiration, we carried boxes of each. Flour, rice, and mineral water are even more essential, and there's also the daily X fruit, a kind of snack that we usually can't bear to buy. We got boxes of it at once. Potato chips, biscuits, and puffed foods, which have low storage requirements and can also satisfy hunger at critical moments, were also carried boxes of each. For various beef pastes, lao gan ma, a brand of chili sauce, and rice mixing pastes, we got boxes of each. Vegetables are the most difficult to store. Maybe we'll have to rely on these sauces to live in the future. For beverages like milk, yogurt, and fruit juice that are likely to go bad later, we only bought boxes of each. And for meat cans and fruit cans, we selected those with the longest shelf life and carried boxes of each. After buying all these things, the truck was basically filled. My father said to drive the truck back first. If we didn't find a suitable house, we would rent another truck tomorrow. Fortunately, on the way back, we received a call from my mother. "Chung Chung, the house has been found. You and your dad just drive the truck back directly. I'll go to the gate to pick you up." 4. My mother proudly showed us the fruits of her day-long tour with the real estate agent. It was a 4-story villa, with 2 floors underground and 2 floors above ground. And it even came with a garage and a small garden. In the 2 underground floors, one floor was a wine cellar, and the other was a home theater. Our family of 3 worked through the night to move the supplies into the wine cellar. The next day, we were so exhausted that we couldn't even straighten our backs. We rested for half a day, and then went out to do some more shopping in the afternoon. Today, my mother's task was to contact a decoration company and ask them to install anti-theft bars and surveillance cameras outside the villa, lay a soundproof layer on the floor, and reinforce the doors and windows. My father and I went to another large supermarket to continue our procurement. Today, we mainly bought daily necessities and some spare household appliances. We stocked up 10 units of each of the induction cookers, rice cookers, air fryers, microwaves, and kettles. Instead of a regular refrigerator, we directly bought a freezer, which would be convenient for storing some meats later. Just as we were coming out of the supermarket, my phone rang. Lu Chungchung, you've been absent from work for 2 days. If you don't want to work, just say so. Do you really think this project can't go on without you? It was my boss, a despicable person who advocated that his subordinates work 007 hours while he himself worked 9 to 5. As soon as I thought that the end of the world was coming soon, a surge of anger welled up in me. I've long been fed up with this job. I work my ass off every day, but in the end, all the bonuses go into your pocket. When there was finally a promotion opportunity, you promoted your relative instead. Work. Screw it. After saying this, I deleted and blocked him in one go, and my anxious mood over the past 2 days was much relieved. Dad, what if it's just a coincidence and the end of the world doesn't come? Will our family have to open a grocery store? I said, trying to find some humor in our difficult situation. Well, I'd rather it be a coincidence. Compared with me, my father was in a heavier mood. He had already experienced the despair of the end of the world once. I looked down at the anonymous message I had sent a couple of days ago, and couldn't help but grip my phone tightly. I hoped he would be safe too. 5. In the following days, my mother stayed behind to supervise the renovation of the villa, and my father and I continued to go to the farmer's market to purchase supplies. 2 days before the end of the world, extreme weather began to occur. During the day, the highest temperature on the ground surface reached as high as 60 degrees Celsius, and at night, the temperature would plummet to 0 degrees Celsius. The TV reports were still trying to explain it with various scientific principles. However, because the last glimmer of hope in my heart was shattered, I was in a heavy mood. My mother and I started to check for any missing items, and make up for them according to the list. Food √ water √ meat √ seasonings √ medicines, vitamins, √ daily necessities √ clothes √ seeds √ vegetables √ chicks √ fish fry √ backup power supply √ gas cylinders √ household appliances √ knives √ for the sake of safety. We didn't dare to raise chickens or grow vegetables in the small garden at all. Instead, we put the chicks and fish fry in the garage, and specially bought dozens of caddies of soil online. Although the lighting in the garage was poor, fortunately, it had a good soundproof effect. 6. On the day when the end of the world arrived, our whole family kept a close eye on the developments on the internet. According to my father, the first batch of zombies were infected with the virus without any warning, as if it was a random spread. At first, when the videos of zombies biting people were posted on the internet, everyone thought they were from a movie. It was not until later that the videos were removed, and more people mutated. I've got it. I held up the newly refreshed Weibo, and pointed it out to my parents. There are suspected rabies patients in City W, and they are biting people frantically on the street. In the evening, the TV also started reporting that a suspected unknown virus was spreading, and was highly contagious, and people were advised to stay at home and wait for rescue. I asked my father how many days we had survived without any preparation in his previous life, and whether we had finally waited for the rescue. My father looked at me, and just that one look made me want to cry out of sadness. He said that in the end, our family couldn't hold on any longer and committed suicide. 7. Just because there were fewer people in the villa area, didn't mean there were no people at all. Standing on the second floor, I watched helplessly as the woman in the opposite garden suddenly mutated, and took a bite on the neck of her nanny. In less than half a minute, the nanny also stood up unsteadily. Chung, stop looking. We can't be saviors. My father came over, and closed the small gap in the curtain. It was as if in this way, we could completely isolate ourselves from the chaotic world outside. For dinner, my mother cooked a table full of delicious dishes to comfort us. Look at you two. You look so gloomy. Don't let yourselves get depressed before the rescue arrives. I nodded, deeply agreeing, and the tightly strung strings in my heart gradually relaxed. Unexpectedly, that night, I became feverish in a daze. 8. I had a fever for 2 days and even started talking nonsense. My parents thought I was going to mutate, because I didn't get better for a long time. Just as they were about to end their lives as a family, I woke up. And I also awakened a strange superpower. I could hear the thoughts of zombies. What a useless superpower. At first, I didn't realize it at all, and kept asking my parents if they could hear the voices around us shouting for food. My parents looked at each other in bewilderment, thinking that I had gone crazy from the fever. It wasn't until I made eye contact with a small zombie wandering in the street through the window. I heard, "Hungry, hungry, chocolate, chocolate." Then I realized that the voices shouting for food in my ears these days might be from these zombies. Could it be that not all zombies like to bite people? To verify this conjecture, I quietly opened the window on the second floor, and threw out a piece of chocolate with all my might. The small zombie seemed to light up its eyes, and chased after the chocolate to the other side. 9. Through observation, I found that people who were bitten turned into zombies, and zombies were like a new species. Their thinking was more like that of animals, and biting people was an instinct. Just like dogs gnawing on bones, cats eating fish, and Ultraman fighting little monsters. They could be trained, but there was no way to communicate with them. So what's the use of this superpower of mine? At most, I could use the principle of the Skinner box to train small zombies to help me throw out the trash. Most adult zombies still craved blood and meat, and I didn't dare to try at all. Sure enough, our family was still following the honest lying flat script in the end of the world. 10. That night, when it was my turn to keep watch, I suddenly heard the sound of a car approaching from a distance. Half a month had passed since the end of the world, and people had been leaving one after another, but no one had ever come. Although the villa area was suitable for hiding from zombies, it was very difficult to search for supplies. Who could it be? I quickly woke up my parents, and our family of 3 secretly observed. The person driving the car seemed a bit flustered, and couldn't drive in a straight line. As they gradually got closer, I held my breath. The car stopped next door to us. A middle-aged couple got out of the car. Judging from their appearance, they had been through a fierce battle, and there was a lot of blood on their bodies. I looked at them, and always felt that they were somewhat familiar. The man pulled the woman and opened the door in a hurry, not even bothering to drive the car into the garage. During this process, the woman tried to go back to the car several times, but was stopped by the man. The two of them looked very sad, as if there was something on the car that they couldn't bear to part with. I was watching intently, when suddenly a low voice sounded in my ear. Chung Chung. Dad, what do you want me for? I didn't call you. My father looked completely puzzled. As if sensing something, I suddenly turned to look at the car parked outside. 11. The night was so dark that it was difficult to even see the surrounding environment clearly, let alone the situation inside the car. My heart skipped a beat, and Mingda felt a sense of unease. Could there be a zombie in the car that knew me? Mom, didn't you ask the real estate agent about it when you rented the villa? What's the situation with the family next door? I involuntarily spoke in a hushed tone. My father also leaned in. The real estate agent said that the owner of this house lives in the city with his son, and rarely comes back. That was strange. Even if they were taking shelter, they shouldn't have come here. Most likely, the one who had mutated in the car was their son. Except for that person with whom I had no further contact. I couldn't remember knowing any wealthy people. Was it just a coincidence? Finally, after a unanimous discussion within our family, we decided to observe first, and then take action. Exposing ourselves blindly would only lead to unnecessary bloodshed. 12. After eating instant food for several consecutive days, I quietly went around to the back of the villa. Making sure that I couldn't be seen from anywhere around, I called out softly, "Chocolate! Chocolate!" A small zombie, with its shoulders hunched, quickly ran over from a few meters away. In its heart, it responded to me joyfully. "Chocolate! Chocolate!" It leaned against the anti-theft railing, its small face stained with blood and looking deathly pale, and its unfocused eyes were eagerly looking at me. My heart ached. The little zombie was only about 7 or 8 years old. Before the end of the world, he was also a little treasure cherished by his whole family. ABA. He pointed at his mouth, indicating that he wanted me to feed him. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but it seemed that he had become a bit smarter under my training. I put on 3 layers of gloves and, trembling with fear, tied an old mobile phone to his head. I was particularly concerned about the zombie in that car. The middle-aged couple who had entered the villa next door hadn't come out since that day, and they didn't even turn on the lights at night. I didn't dare to go over there easily, so I could only come up with this method and ask the little zombie to take a look. This time, I didn't give him any garbage, and the little zombie seemed a bit puzzled. I gesticulated for a long time, and threw a lot of chocolate, before leading him to the vicinity of that car. Only after ensuring that the mobile phone could capture the situation inside the car, did I call the little zombie back. 13. At this time in the past, my father was on watch. My mother was in the garage fiddling with the vegetable seeds that just wouldn't germinate. I clutched the mobile phone, and sneaked back to my room like a thief. The picture in the video was shaking violently, and I dragged the progress bar little by little to check. Then I froze. I never expected to see Shenning Yen in such a situation. 6 years had passed, and he had shed the roundness of his youth. His once childish face had become mature and handsome, but now, his handsome face was deathly pale, and his once bright and lively eyes had lost their vitality. Shenning Yen had turned into a zombie. He was firmly tied to the back seat with a seatbelt. I suddenly felt as if my head had been hit with a sledgehammer, and I was in a daze. When I came to my senses, my eyes were already blurred with tears. I covered my mouth tightly with my hand, afraid that my sobs would alarm my parents. How could this be? I had clearly sent him a message. 14. It is said that poverty begets evil thoughts, while wealth nurtures kindness. I deeply understood this saying when I was a child. I will never forget that when I was 7 years old, under the dimly lit sky, a dirty, stinky hand reeking of alcohol tightly covered my mouth. I listened as the voices of my little friends calling me gradually faded away. I experienced the taste of despair for the first time. Just then, it was Shenning Yen who sensed something was wrong, and appeared like a ray of light. That ferocious homeless man even angrily threw his small body several meters away. As a result, he lost the hearing in one ear. He should have been a perfect person, but because of me he had a flaw. From then on, I began to stick to Shen Yin all the time. When he gave a speech on stage as an outstanding student representative, I clapped my hands desperately from the audience. When he was sweating profusely on the basketball court, I would bring him water and a towel. He also tacitly allowed me to follow him. So I had always been self-indulgent enough to think that he liked me too, until I confessed my love to him after the college entrance examination. The cold and sarcastic look in his eyes was still vivid in my memory even today. He even resolutely moved away the next day. I stood by the window and looked at that car, standing there until very late. A terrifying thought gradually emerged in my mind. 15. Dad, I know who the people in the villa next door are. When we were having a meal, after I told my parents my thoughts, as expected, I was opposed. Chung, if you said you wanted to share some of the supplies with the Shen couple, or let them move in, your mother and I could accept that. But you said you want to bring back Shen Yin, who has turned into a zombie. I just want to ask you, did you consider your mother and me when you made this decision? My mother didn't say anything, and it was obvious that she shared the same opinion as my father. My father said that he was reborn not to watch me do something reckless. Helplessly, I had to take a step back for the time being. But in my heart, I secretly had another plan. 16. The next day, I disguised myself and went to find the Shen couple. Taking advantage of the fact that there were no living people in this area, I used the little zombie to lead away the other zombies. As I passed by the car where Shen Yin was trapped, I couldn't help but look into the car. He also turned his head and looked at me. I clearly heard his heart crying out, "Water! Water!" Shen Yin was really different from other zombies, even after turning into one. I placed my hand on the glass window, and Shen Yin stared firmly at me, and also put his hand on the glass window. My heart trembled, and I quickly withdrew my gaze and walked away quickly. 17. Uncle, you said you have supplies here? The communication with the Shen couple went unexpectedly smoothly. They didn't even hesitate much before opening the door for me. Facing their openness, I felt a bit ashamed of my shirkan. Yes, Yin suddenly purchased a large amount of supplies for the family a few days before the end of the world, and he also left quite a lot here in the villa. So Shen Yin had seen my message and believed it. Then how could this have happened? Looking at the haggard faces of Mr. and Mrs. Shen, I suddenly understood that they didn't trust me easily, but rather their will to survive was weak. They said that Shen Yin wasn't bitten, but he suddenly had a fever and mutated on the way to the villa. So I told Mr. and Mrs. Shen about my superpower and my plan. They hesitated for a long time. Chung, even if Yin were still himself, he wouldn't want you to take this risk. Actually, based on my experience of getting along with the little zombie, I was 80% sure that Shen Yin wouldn't bite me. When a zombie's inner voice is not fixated on flesh and blood or human brains, the probability of them biting people is not very high. I suddenly remembered that when I watched my own swordsman before, Li Dazui always said, "That's Huilan." Now I also want to say, that's Shen Yin. I can accept that he is living a good life in a place where I can't see him, but I can't bear to see him suffering day by day right in front of my eyes, even if he has become a different species. 18. There is both good news and bad news. Good news. I brought back Shen Yin without a scratch. Bad news. My superpower works intermittently on him, just like now. I took him to the bathroom, hoping he could take a shower, but he just stood there motionless. Didn't you want to take a shower? He glanced at me. Then his eyes turned and looked towards the door, still not moving. During this process, I didn't hear any of his inner thoughts. I rolled my eyes, came out and closed the door. After a while, the sound of hualala water came from the bathroom. Speaking of the process of me bringing back Shen Yin, it can be said to be very thrilling. When I went to open the car door that day, I specifically wore 2 down jackets, and also put on protective gloves. Shen Yin, I'm taking you home. Please don't bite me. Shen Yin stared straight at me without any movement. I bent down to untie the seatbelt. It's a bit embarrassing to say, but this was the first time I had been so close to Shen Yin. Just as I was pulling Shen Yin back, a sudden change occurred. A voice suddenly rang out in my ear. Hungry. Eat brains. Eat brains. I immediately turned around and looked at Shen Yin in horror, only to find that he was like a cat with its fur standing on end, full of hostility. Damn it. It turned out that 2 zombies had approached without my notice. Shen Yin reacted faster than me. He intercepted one zombie, and threw it flying with great force. I instinctively hid behind Shen Yin, but unexpectedly, the other zombie pounced on me extremely quickly, and knocked me to the ground. Shen Yin let out an ow sound, and was about to rush over. It was too late. The stinky mouth of the zombie was right in front of me, and I closed my eyes in despair. Mr. and Mrs. Shen and my parents not far away all let out terrified shouts. Chung. After a while, there was no expected pain. I slowly opened my eyes. I saw that the zombie in front of me had a look of struggle and pain on its face, as if it had suddenly discovered that there was shit under a delicious ice cream. Then it and vomited. I heard it say in its heart, "Love-struck fool. Even a dog wouldn't eat this." Me. Shen Yin. Parents. Mr. and Mrs. Shen. Shen Yin was the first to come to his senses. With a fierce expression on his face, his long, white fingers directly penetrated the zombie's brain. 19. After the sound of the water stopped, I knocked on the door. Not expecting him to answer me, I directly opened the bathroom door. Sure enough, Shen Yin in the bathroom was standing idiotic under the shower head, not even changing his posture. His hair was wet from the water, and hung quietly on both sides of his face. The water droplets slowly slid down his clear jawline into his collarbone, and then disappeared into his shirt. I felt too embarrassed to look at him for too long. With a sigh, I turned around and went downstairs to find Mr. Shin to come and give him a bath. Shen Yen, who had turned into a zombie, didn't bite people, but he was really stupid. When I went downstairs, I ran into my father. He let out a cold snort and ignored me. I knew he was still angry about what had happened that day. Actually, when I thought about it later, I also felt a lingering fear, especially since even the zombie had called me a love-struck fool. If it hadn't been for Shen Yen protecting me, there might have been one more zombie wandering outside by now. Thinking of this, I began to pester my father shamelessly to apologize. Dad, I was really wrong. I won't do such a dangerous thing again next time. I promise. I followed my father from upstairs to downstairs. My father went from being serious to impatient, and finally to giving me a lecture. And he finally ended his Cold War with me. In the evening, our family of 3 and the Shen couple had dinner downstairs, while Shen Yen was alone in the room upstairs. Because we still haven't figured out what he eats. We gave him raw meat, snacks, and meals, but he didn't eat any of them. So we didn't dare to let him out of the room easily. 20. Shen Yen, what on earth do you eat? You won't end up starving to death in the end, will you? I muttered softly, and tried to hold a slice of orange to his mouth. This was his favorite fruit in the past. It had been more than 2 months since the outbreak of the end of the world. The perishable fresh fruits and vegetables had been mostly consumed by us. Unfortunately, the cultivation in the garage didn't show much progress. If this continued, the only vegetables left to eat would probably be enoki mushrooms and bean sprouts. Shen Yen, like a child, lowered his eyes to look at the orange, then raised his eyes to look at me. After frowning and thinking for a while, he and swallowed it in one go. Then he slowly raised his hand. A shiny thing like a diamond was lying in his palm. Is this for me? Shen Yen didn't make any sound from his mouth, but in his heart, he was constantly urging me to take it. I felt that the more I communicated with zombie Shen Yen, the more his language system would gradually become richer. 21. In the middle of the night, I was suddenly awakened by the roars of zombies outside. Their inner voices kept echoing in my ears. Kill! Kill! Tonight it was Uncle Shen on watch. When I went over, he was looking outside nervously. Uncle Shen! Chungchung, look. I don't know what's going on. Those 2 zombies on the street suddenly started fighting each other. I looked outside. One tall and one fat zombie were fighting like wild beasts. The scene was extremely bloody, so what they were saying was kill. After a while, the fat zombie used its weight advantage to press the tall zombie to the ground. While the tall one couldn't get up, the fat zombie punched and smashed his head. Fortunately, it was dark and not very clear. Otherwise, it would be hard to fall asleep tonight. The fat zombie groped on the ground for a while, as if it picked up something and swallowed it. When it stood up again, it was obviously much more agile, and walked almost like a normal person. I suddenly realized that the thing Shen Yen gave me, and the thing the fat zombie ate might be the same thing. A crystal nucleus. Could it be that zombies can evolve by eating the crystal nuclei of their own kind? 22. I fed the crystal nucleus that Shen Yen gave me back to him. Then I took him to the garage, and continued to try to teach him to speak. Since I found that he would occasionally respond to me in his heart, I have been enthusiastic about the re-education of zombie Shen Yen. I pointed to the chicks digging in the soil on the ground. This is a chick. Chick. Shen Yen looked in the direction I pointed, with no reaction. I pointed to the fish in the pond again. This is a small fish. Small fish. Based on his past personality, I seriously suspected that Shen Yen had too much of a human ego. After all, even the little zombie that could only say, ABA ABA, could now stumble and say chocolate. Although the tone was so strange that it made people laugh. I pointed to myself again. This is Lu Chungchung. Chungchung. Shen Yen looked at me, blinked, and suddenly smiled. I suddenly felt a pleasant surprise as if seeing hope, and also a touch of emotion like a flower blooming in the desert. I couldn't help but murmur, our Shen Yen, even if he becomes a zombie, is still the most handsome one. He still didn't speak, but I heard his deep voice in my ear, Chungchung. My nose felt sour. This was the second time he called my name since the night he first became a zombie. The first time, it spanned time. And the second time, it spanned life and death. 23. Our 2 families welcomed a rare peaceful period in the end of the world. Having learned from the previous lesson, even though I knew that the crystal nucleus could make Shen Yen better, I never planned to go out again. A few days ago, the government notified the survivors who had the ability through radio broadcasts to go to the newly built survivor base in City B. City B was thousands of miles away. Besides Shen Yen, none of us in the 2 families was capable of making such a long journey, so we unanimously decided to stay where we were. Fortunately, we finally solved the vegetable problem. It wasn't that we had figured out how to farm. Instead, Aunt Shin suddenly had a fever, and awakened a plant-based superpower that could accelerate the growth of seeds. Although it had no lethality, it was much better than my useless superpower. For this, we specially had a hot pot dinner in the basement to celebrate. Chungchung, this is for you. After the dinner, Aunt Shin stopped me, and handed me an old mobile phone. I recognized it at a glance as my old mobile phone. It was accidentally broken by Shen Yen at that time. After he took it to be repaired, he bought a new one for me. This is what Yen has been carrying with him. This child, he's good in every way, but his self-esteem is too strong. Aunt Shin choked up a bit, sniffed, and forced herself to continue. Originally, Auntie didn't plan to tell you, but Ing Yen is in this state now. If I, as his mother, don't say it, I'm afraid you two will regret it for the rest of your lives. Aunt Shin told me that although Shen Ing Yen was introverted, he would unconsciously smile when he mentioned me. Everything I gave him was put in a special collection cabinet by him. Even the empty mineral water bottles were carefully kept by him with the date pasted on. No wonder when I went to his house, he never let me into his room. Aunt Shin also said that later, after he fled in panic when I confessed my love to him, he locked himself in the room for several days. I asked him, since you like Chungching so much, why don't you make it clear to her? This silly child said that he was afraid that you always felt more guilty than in love with him, and he couldn't mislead you. Shen Ing Yen's self-esteem and inferiority complex made him unable to speak up, and my cowardice also made me back off. After all, at that time, I was really afraid that he hated me in his heart. 24. As soon as the mobile phone was charged, it turned on automatically. The background picture was a bit old-fashioned. It was a big headshot of me in school uniform. At that time, the mobile phone had a small memory. Besides photos and a few software, it could hardly hold anything else. I opened the message section. The first one was Huron, the reminder of the end of the world, that I anonymously sent to Shen Ing Yen. The messages below were all from the note Chungching to him. My heart ached. So he had known it was me for a long time. I opened the memo, and there were some scattered records in it. March 2nd. I thought the three-pointer I just made was very accurate. She should have seen it, right? March 9th. The weather is a bit cold. I'll buy a cup of milk tea for her later. April 6th. Supervise her not to eat ice these days, and remind her to go to bed early. April 9th. Someone talked to me today, and I didn't hear it again. June 10th. She lowered her eyes shyly. It was a scene I had fantasized about countless times. But the broken voice was drowned out in the cheers not far away. The voices that others took for granted could cause huge interference to me. What should I answer? What can I answer? I didn't even hear her words clearly. How ironic. I'm really a loser. June 11th. I'm sorry, I love you. May 11th. She seems to be doing well. June 10th. It's this day again. Maybe she doesn't remember me anymore. July 1st. She was late today. I didn't see her when she passed by. 25. It was already midnight when I finished reading all the messages. I sniffed, picked up the scattered tissues and put them in the trash can. Then I groped in the dark and came to Shen Ing Yen's room. The click sound of opening the door was especially clear in the quiet night. In the bedroom, Shen Ing Yen was wearing pajamas and sitting obediently on the edge of the bed, looking at the moon outside the window. Zombies seemed not to need to sleep. The moonlight spilled all over the ground, and his silhouette was reflected on the bright window. Shen Ing Yen. I knew he heard me, but zombie Shen Ing Yen rarely reacted to sounds, so I changed my way of speaking. Chungching is here. Shen Ing Yen suddenly turned his head to look at me. I felt both funny and sad. I walked to his left and sat down beside him. This was my habit since I was a child. Shen Ing Yen stared straight at me. I leaned on his shoulder and said a lot of things that I had wanted to say, but didn't dare to before. Finally, I smiled slightly, took his hand, and leaned close to his left ear. Shen Ing Yen, I love you, not just because you saved me. Now, I can be said to have saved you too. So we're even. So would you be my boyfriend? The night was so dark that I couldn't see the light in Shen Ing Yen's eyes. So dark that I couldn't see the newly formed corpse spots on his neck. I could only hear him quietly responding in his heart. When our eyes met, there seemed to be a flash of light in his eyes that had long lost focus. I lowered my eyes and glanced at his crimson lips. Shen Ing Yen, you've heard the story of Snow White, right? This time it's my turn to be the prince. After saying that, I covered his eyes and put my lips on his. I knew from the beginning that Shen Ing Yen was between a zombie and a human. When the part of him that belongs to humans prevails, I can't hear his inner voice. For example, at this moment, his heart is silent, and his arm quietly tightens around my waist. 26. Late at night, the sound of zombies fighting outside came again. Half asleep and half awake, I shrank fearfully into Shen Ing Yen's arms. His embrace was cold, exuding the smell of mint laundry detergent, which made me feel at ease. The zombies were constantly evolving, and the protective fence outside the villa was knocked askew. Maybe soon, we would have to give up the ground floor and hide in the basement. When I woke up in the morning, I thought I would be in Shen Ing Yen's arms. Unexpectedly, when I turned sideways, I fell on an empty space. I woke up suddenly, and a sense of foreboding rose in my heart. Uncle, Auntie, have you seen Shen Ing Yen? No. Isn't he in his own room? Dad, Mom, have you seen Shen Ing Yen? The few of us searched the whole villa, but didn't find him. I quickly went to check the surveillance records around the villa. It turned out that after I fell asleep last night, Shen Ing Yen directly opened the window on the second floor and jumped out. I looked at the scene in the surveillance in a daze. Shen Ing Yen had left. 27. Attention all survivors. Zombies can evolve by devouring the crystal nuclei of their own kind. High-level zombies may even awaken superpowers. Currently, it is not recommended that you go to the survivor base. Please wait for rescue in place. The government will regularly drop supplies in various places. Not long after Shen Ing Yen left, the villa lost power. My father and Uncle Shen fiddled with it and connected the emergency power supply. Life went on as usual. I never said I would go out to look for Shen Ing Yen. The four elders were afraid that I would be sad, so they didn't mention him in front of me. I took the garbage to the little zombie as usual, but found that the corpse spots on the little zombie had spread to his face. Like Shen Yen, he neither hunted humans, nor had the ability to hunt his own kind. Maybe before long, he would gradually decay. Looking at the little zombie, I could also guess the reason why Shen Yen left. But all I could do was sigh. 28. In the middle of the night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. Suddenly, there was a slight noise by the door, and a black shadow quickly rushed to the front of my bed. Chengqing, get up quickly. Your father said that someone drove here, and asked us to hide in the wine cellar first. I let out a breath. It was my mother. Tonight it was my father's turn to be on watch. He said that he saw 2 cars driving in from the surveillance at the gate. They were also driving with their headlights on arrogantly. 2 cars meant there were probably quite a few people. If they just rested here for one night, that would be okay. But if they found something and had evil intentions, we might be in danger. The sudden sound of gunshots, tot-a-tot, rang out in the quiet night. They even had guns. We quickly packed some things and hurriedly hid in the wine cellar. Thus, we crouched in the basement while keeping an eye on the surveillance at the gate. However, after several days passed, the 2 cars still didn't leave. A zombie king has been unexpectedly discovered in City W. All survivors are strongly advised to pay close attention to their safety. The state has organized personnel to go for rescue. Survivors, hold on. Hope is just ahead. As soon as I received this latest broadcast on the radio, I noticed several figures appearing on the surveillance at the gate. In a short while, the Willa Willa alarm sound rang throughout the entire villa. How dare they? Zombies are extremely sensitive to sound. Once the alarm rings, I'm afraid all the zombies in the entire villa area will rush towards here. No matter how much weaponry and equipment they have, it will be difficult for them to get away at that time. Brother, this is the last villa. If there are still living people in this area, they are probably hiding here. Search. The surveillance inside the house was equipped with a sound pickup device, and their words came through the earphones clearly. The 5 of us held our breaths nervously, and my mother even involuntarily grasped my arm tightly. Brother, there's no one here. I felt that the sound of my own heartbeat even overpowered the dull dong-dong sound of the boots hitting the ground. There are almost no zombies in this area, and there's even fresh garbage placed on the street. It's impossible that there's no one. Search again. Since they've been able to hide for so long, they must have supplies. No zombies? How could there be no zombies? Could it be? A conjecture suddenly emerged in my mind, listening to the sound of the footsteps getting closer and then farther away, and finally stopping directly above our heads. My heart hung high in my throat. Dong dong dong. Brother, it's hollow underneath here. I closed my eyes in despair. It was all over. 29. Just as the few of us were holding kitchen knives and preparing to fight to the death, suddenly there was a loud noise outside. Brother, the zombie king. The zombie king is coming with a group of zombies. What? Hearing the sound of them leaving in a hurry, we all let out a sigh of relief at the same time. But this was just a temporary solution to our urgent problem. No matter which side, the zombie king or this group of people won, it wouldn't be a good thing for us. It's best if they both end up badly. Later, we'll go out and take a look. We can't just sit here and wait for death. After all, humans are more terrifying. My father said in a low voice. I understood what he meant and nodded. Dad, I'll go with you. At the very least, I can hear the inner voice of the zombie king. Lao Lu, I'll go with you too. Uncle Shen echoed. When there was gradually no sound outside, the 3 of us climbed out of the wine cellar. The inside of the house was in a mess. Several corpses were lying on the ground. The door of the villa was also wide open. This was the first time I had faced such a bloody scene directly. I couldn't help but frown in disgust. Eat brains. Suddenly, a zombie rushed out from the corner. Ignoring me, it directly pounced on my father. Lao Lu. Uncle Shun pulled my father back. I quickly stepped forward to block it. Ugh. Me. My father. Uncle Shun. What a familiar scene. Just as the zombie was about to reach out and strangle me again, a figure appeared quickly and separated me from the zombie. The zombie stepped back in fear a few steps and rushed out of the door with its shoulders hunched. 30. Looking at the person in front of me, my nose felt sour, and tears welled up in my eyes uncontrollably. My voice was choked with sobs as I spoke. Shen Yin, you still know to come back. The Shen Yin in front of me had gotten rid of the corpse spots, and his skin color had returned to normal. I didn't know where he got a set of clean clothes. He was truly elegant and handsome. At this moment, his light brown eyes were fixed on me, and he quickly wiped away my tears with his hand. Chengqing, don't cry. The more he said that, the more my tears flowed. He let out a sigh and hugged me tightly in his arms. He said in his heart, I will never leave you again. Ingyan, it's Ingyan. You're better. Uncle Shun, who had come to his senses, looked at Shen Ingyan with great excitement. Dad, Uncle Lu. Shen Ingyan's voice was a bit hoarse. Then he explained his miraculous experience to the 4 elders. I sat next to him, and couldn't help but smile with my lips pursed. I never expected that the good student Shen Ingyan would also lie one day. 31. My wedding with Shen Ingyan was set on a sunny spring day. Besides my parents and Shen Ingyan's parents, there was also a little zombie at the wedding. He didn't return to a normal appearance like Shen Ingyan, but the corpse spots had faded from his young face, and he still had a preference for chocolate. Chocolate, come here. I beckoned and handed the chocolate to the little zombie. He glanced timidly at Shen Ingyan. Seeing that he didn't react, he reached out and took the chocolate. The wedding dress was brought back by Shen Ingyan. He said that what other girls had, my Chungchung should also have. My father reluctantly served as the master of ceremonies. During the oath-taking, I was so bothered by Xininyan's inner voice. This spring day made up for all the regrets of the summer, when I was 18. Maybe one day the end of the world will come to an end, or maybe it won't. Fortunately, my lover and my family are all by my side. With them, life will be full of hope. This world is absurd, corrupt and inhumane, but only love is gentle, lucid and spotless. Xininyan, I do. Lu Chungchung, I love you. Side story, Xininyan. I had a keen sense of hearing since I was a child, which is why I was able to save Chungchung from danger. When I woke up in the hospital, my mother was holding me. She didn't scold me at all, and even praised me as a little hero. At that time, I didn't understand what it really meant to be deaf in one ear. Later, my seat was always in the first row. When walking side by side with others, I always had to be on the right. All activities that required identifying positions by sound were no longer for me. Everyone said that Xininyan was cold, arrogant, and didn't like to talk to people. But what did it matter? At least I still had Chungchung. My Chungchung. She was as energetic and lively as her name. But fate once again cruelly drew a dividing line when I was 18. From then on, I could only watch her from a distance. I thought I would quietly watch her get married and have children. Until a text message shattered this peace. I hadn't used this number since I left Chungchung. Besides her, no one else would send a message to this number. So what if it's the end of the world? Since the day I was 18, every day has been like the end of the world to me. Now I'm just barely alive. Perhaps it was precisely because of such a negative thought that I got a fever and was infected with the virus. When I was trapped in the car, my consciousness gradually faded. I had no guilt towards my parents. At least I had prepared supplies and brought them to a safe place. But towards Chungchung, I felt deeply ashamed. I thought I would completely turn into a monster that only knew about flesh and blood. Unexpectedly, I still had some clear consciousness. It was as if I had been put under a separate glass cover in this world. Everything was blurry, and everything could only be done by the instincts of my body. When the corpse spots gradually covered my whole body, because I didn't devour flesh and blood or my own kind, Chungchung's words awakened my strong will to survive. It was better to leave and strive for a future than to rot in front of her. If I died outside, at least she wouldn't see my disgusting and unrecognizable appearance. I first targeted the zombies in the villa area. At least in this way, my lover and my family could be safer. In the process of fighting again and again, because I devoured more and more crystal nuclei, I started to become like a normal person. During this period, there were also many powerful zombies that wanted to hunt me. The most thrilling time. I was even almost choked to death. But when I caught a glimpse of the bridal shop not far away from the corner of my eye, I burst out with a strong desire to survive. There was still a beautiful dream hidden there, waiting for me to fulfill it.